Welcome, everybody, and hello, Jordan. Thank you so much for joining today for another awesome interview. So, Jordan, you are one of our platform engineering ambassadors. You are a platform engineering leader that I have learned a lot from. You are my go to source for basically every question I have on the topic of organizational platform engineering leadership. So I just want to jump straight in and kind of ask you about kind of your experience in the platform engineering leadership side, what you've kind of learned there, what your challenges have been. So tell me about you as a platform leader.
Oh, sure. First of all, good morning, good afternoon, whenever people listening to this podcast, and thank you for having me on here. Yes, a quick intro of myself. Been in the industry for over 20 plus years and have done a lot of things with, I would say, distributed systems, platform engineering, developer experience over the past decade plus, and happy to share some of the hard-earned lessons.
Nice. So you've been an engineering leader for a long time. You've also been a platform leader. I'm curious about what are the differences that leading a platform engineering organization might have compared to just an engineering organization in general.
Yeah, I think that the kind of the two main ones that come to mind that are a little bit more tricky is early on, people were businesses did not quite understand the value of platform, meaning how does this benefit the business? A lot of the work that this particular team is doing is a little bit, I would say, indirect to what the entire business is experiencing in terms of technical and business outcomes. However, the impact is very broad and very pronounced. If I can equate it to someone, it would be akin to, hey, this is your pricing strategy. It can have such a dramatic positive or negative effect on you as a business, but it's not as kind of as close to I would say non-technical audiences in terms of making those initial connections. The other thing that initially organizations didn't consider is this. It almost felt like a no-brainer that, hey, if I'm developing a product, meaning software for people to use, um, I would surround a given developer team with a dedicated product manager or product management skill or focus. That's not something that was, I would say, as obvious or as crisp or as clean until I would say over the past 2, maybe 3 years at most, where businesses sort of started to realize, oh, this is just another form of software that we are developing, that we are building in-house internally. The audiences, our main developer community. How do we actually make our kind of software practitioners or data practitioners be more productive, get kind of reduce their time to outcomes, be successful or an actual learning? How do we actually accelerate that? To me, those are kind of the two main differences that do come to mind. And I think that most, I would say, leaders or counterparts of myself, whatever they sit in whatever organization, they probably still have to, I would say, run into these challenges and solve for those at the organizational level, just so they can make the practice be successful on behalf of the org.
This is an answer that's, I think really perfectly put, but also is captured in almost everybody that I talk to. You'll notice neither of those things are directly technological problems. They're not problems in relation to tools or tooling. It's the cultural challenges always. I mean, I talk to like 400 plus leaders a year. It's always kind of the cultural challenges around platform engineering. And I'm curious to zoom in a bit on this idea of the platform product manager. 3 years ago, we knew a platform team needed platform product mindset. We knew the team needed this product mindset in general, but it was still a bit iffy of whether they needed a dedicated product manager role or if they would even be able to get one if they asked for one. So would you say that to have a successful platform team, you need to have that dedicated product manager role?
I think it would probably be, it depends on each individual business and its current life cycle. Obviously, if you're a smaller organization, you're still a startup, there are some good debates around whether you should be starting a platform engineering practice at that stage. Maybe you're laying down the foundation, but that will be a little bit different in terms of how you and I are approaching platform engineering as a discipline within this conversation. depending on based on what I'm hearing from some folks in my network or from some other organizations, you may not be getting a product manager to begin with, or maybe you are getting a slice of a product manager within an organization who might be sitting in a different team, or or they have like a split focus. Maybe it's a point 0.3 or a point 0.5, of a product manager. In some situations, it is a classic product manager who has experience in building products, but they don't necessarily have perspective on how to approach a platform focus. So it's very mix and match. And I think a lot of this obviously is driven by the macro that we are sort of experiencing. And if you zoom out at a high level, again, we're still trying to teach sort of business level executives around the value of you placing a product manager with a platform focus within your organization, so you can see and get the benefits of the multiplier effect indirectly. So effectively, it's not necessarily the first thought that comes to mind when people have to do headcount allocation on an annual basis. However, there are some good ways where I would say even teams without proper allocated product management focus, they can help themselves. There are specific ways and tools that you don't necessarily have to get perfect in order for you to derive value out of the team or show that this is actually a successful outcome. And one of the ways that at least I've been coaching teams over the years has been try to take a deeper look at a product operating model, because that teaches you that you need to be doing both discovery and delivery in parallel. Simple concept, but the discovery part is where most platform teams don't have experience with, or using very lightweight prioritization frameworks that help you quantify the size of your opportunities for you as a platform team, in terms of being able to compare and contrast which one should I be going after first. Can I use that logic? Can I use this mechanism to be able to level set with my stakeholders in terms of this is how we are prioritizing opportunities, and it's not like we don't want to get to your work, but this is what we actually have on the list, and that actually helps you build alignment. And as long as you have that and you're doing it in the open, so to speak, internally, I think you're going to get a lot of consistency and a lot of trust around that.
And so you would say, if you can get one, it's a huge benefit getting the platform product manager role. But for those who can't, or maybe can't get one just yet, there's still lots of things from a product management perspective they can approach. So I think what you are kind of inferring about was the RICE framework that you wrote a fantastic article on around prioritization. There's fantastic product management principles, thinking about the product operating model. You have another great article on that. I think we'll put those in the description so that anyone can find them. But then also kind of simpler things like user research, thinking about documentation, that might still be things within the wheelhouse of an engineering organization, but you're still able to get that platform product thinking.
Yep, you nailed it. Yeah, maybe we can talk about a little bit more about RICE.
I
RICE in
think that's
itself.
exactly where I was going next. So
Yeah.
tell me all about the RICE framework and why teams should be using it.
Yeah, again, the article that we wrote is particularly aimed at teams who don't have a dedicated product manager focus, and they're in a situation where they have to help themselves so they can be successful. The RISE framework has existed for a long period of time, not necessarily a novel concept. I think if you're in product, maybe you can go back and date it to at least, I don't know, maybe a decade. Somebody will probably fact check me and correct me that I have my dates wrong, which is perfectly fine, but it's been there out there for a while. But effectively, it's a simple, rather simplistic concept. You have four legs. The first one is, hey, what is my reach? Meaning, how many potential customers do I have with this particular opportunity? Are we talking about a group of 10 developers? Are we talking about a group of 50 developers? Maybe three business units which are comprised of 500 different engineers who are specializing in, let's call I would say Java. You can get as granular as that. The second leg is your impact. Obviously, usually that the way that the framework defines it is hey, it's a multiplier. Yeah, you use a scale of 1 to 3, where 1 is very small impact, 2 is like a medium, and 3 is like, big impact. This is a little bit arbitrary. Like, it leaves some room for interpretation. And usually what I kind of say, like, folks having a little harder time is, hey, am I picking the right numbers here in terms of like, sizing? So this is where like, it's a little bit art and science. Confidence is something that is the third leg. This is something that engineering leaders have a lot more expertise in, and it's, I don't know, easy to translate this. Usually when you're doing your planning and forecasting, you tend to have, I would say, maybe about 100% confidence what's happening or what the team is going to work on within the next quarter, within like, the immediate 3 months. Then months 4 to 6, the picture starts getting a little bit more fuzzy. There is some uncertainty here and there, usually around, I don't know, maybe personnel, cross-functional, some other prioritization, staffing. That confidence drops to like, 80%. And anything after like, months 7 to 12, usually about 50% confidence in terms of like, hey, this is how specific I can get with that work. So effectively confidence is take that life lesson that you have learned from that and just apply it within the same framework. This is also multiplier. Like, the article lists out like, how we can approach it or think about it, but it's basically the same values that we just discussed. And finally, it's the effort. Like, effort is the last leg. How much engineering time do we think this is going to like, sort of like, take us to complete this? And this is why, like, it's a little bit clever. The higher the score, the less effort it actually takes. And obviously, if you rate again on the scale of 1 to 3, 3 is the smallest effort. I don't know, picking some numbers out of thin air. Maybe that's like 2 weeks, a single sprint. If it's a medium effort, maybe that's like a month or like 2 or 3 sprints. Or if it's a large effort, maybe we're talking about a quarter or like a multi-quarter effort. The reason why I kind of like use this as sort of like as a potential anchors is a lot of folks in the industry already have experience using like sizing frameworks. Agile is one, but you don't have to use that like in a particular, or maybe you want to use a flavor of Agile to like help you size. The idea for you is just to use the sizing method consistently across different opportunities, so you're landing on a consistent answer, both on behalf of your team and obviously your audiences and stakeholders. So what you do is like, after you combine all of these like, 4 different legs, maybe you set up a very simplistic or very crude, let's call it like, Google Sheets or like, an Excel Sheets or whatever, like, however we want to do this. But as we know, Excel or Sheets tends to rule the world. Like, it runs into businesses for all we know. You do a very simplistic form. You list all the different opportunities, and then you just let like, be using sort of like, some of these outcomes or some of these answers to kind of like, drive your own prioritization, if you will. If you do this consistently, and I would say maybe like, once a quarter, I think that effectively provides a good enough picture for your customers and stakeholders in terms of like, how you sizing those opportunities. Now, this is the idealistic world, right? In grounded in reality, obviously the RISE framework will give you one set of answers, but there will always be some kind of like, extenuating circumstances, like something is a higher business priority. So just because like, the RISE framework tells you a given opportunity is probably a little bit lower, maybe all of a sudden its impact increases from one small to like, to a 3 really big impact because of specific business context. You just have to be ready to kind of like, handle that, and obviously level set expectations both internally, and usually like, the biggest challenges are setting those expectations with your own team.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, you can definitely, for those listening, find the full article in the description, and that goes through a lot of what was talked about here. But I think that was pretty much a perfect covering. And there's lots of things that individual teams can do if they don't have a platform product manager yet. The question would be what advice you would give for helping convince a boss. Say you're the head of platform, you're trying to convince your boss, hey, I'd like this dedicated role. Look, we've been doing the optimization stuff we can. We've been doing the product management stuff we can, but we've reached a maturity level. We need the dedicated role. How do you make that argument to your boss?
Yeah, it's rather, I would say, easy. I mean, being in those shoes for quite some time, maybe it's easy for me. But usually the way that you approach this conversation is this: hey, We have gotten to a specific level of, I would say, evolution in terms of mindset and approach on the engineering team side. We're going to start hitting a particular bottleneck. Usually it's around having the ability to perform enough customer empathy or discovery sessions to make sure that you're capturing all the different potential user stories that are out there. Usually if you don't have that sort of level of dedicated focus and closeness, you get a a sense of the picture, but sometimes that picture may look not as what you expect in practice, so you lose that level of precision. And you also have to, the way that I like to preface this is, obviously we can keep asking our engineering leaders to perform or lean in a little bit more into that capacity if we need them to. However, there is a little bit of a risk. The more that they do that, the more risk we introduce to their ability to deliver just in general, and in terms of timeliness, in terms of quality, you just have to walk that fine line of, hey, if we did go up across that line, we obviously are potentially going to start risking delivery or quality of delivery. And usually when you preface it like that, I think most, I would say, senior leaders, executives, or even business leaders understand it, that hey, this is actually potentially impactful, especially for an organization that is trying to have a multiplier effect on the entirety of the technology community. So if you put that at risk, you don't necessarily get the nice benefits of potentially positively impacting the rest of your, I would say, larger headcount investments.
And I think I really like this word that you keep using, multiplier. And I think it's really important for platform teams to think in that context. And I can see it when I look at platform maturity at many organizations. The ones, ironically, who started with a lower baseline end up being quite mature platform engineering organizations almost faster, because that multiplier effect is so much huger. We haven't used the word ROI here yet, but when you're thinking about something like ROI, which is obviously what most leaders in your organization care about, platform engineering needs to be that multiplier. It needs to be really improving things beyond just the internal investment, or else otherwise, why would you change processes? Why would you go through the organizational transformation? And I think on that topic, I want to take us back to something we touched on a little bit at the beginning, which is about how big of an organization do you need to have to think about platform engineering? So you talked about, kind of the 50 developer organization. There's obviously no clear cutoff line, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on when should an organization start thinking about platform engineering and maybe building those foundations, and when should they really fully start to commit?
Sure. It's an excellent question. I don't think there is a definitive answer for anyone within the community. Again, it also depends on the organization, the focus, the business vertical, the maturity level of investments that each business has. From a pure philosophical, and again, this is the Jordan opinion. It's not necessarily something that is reflective of any business or capturing anyone else's thoughts or opinions. I do tend to think that you start hitting that inflection point just in general right around the, let's call it 150 developer communities, sort of landmark. And it's always easier to kind of determine this when you're looking back, not when it's happening in the moment. So it's very difficult for you as as a potential leader, when do you make that level of investment? But I have found it that you start seeing a lot more clear, to your point, multiplier effects, easier to derive ROI figures in terms of numbers with that size of a community. Just the numbers look, I would say, a little bit I would say appetizing for you to have maybe that level of investment over time. And again, this is Jordan opinion, right? It's not representative of anyone else, and again, it's highly dependent on your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you've got a really advanced, fast-moving, organized, good culture engineering organization, then you can probably survive a bit longer. Yes. I always think about that ability to kind of Slack message or DM your teammates. Once you get to a big enough organization size, it becomes almost impossible to get all your developers on a call to just DM people about problems. That becomes a huge anti-pattern. And if that's a huge anti-pattern, that's kind of a sense where it's like, okay, our communication is not even possible really. We're probably a large enough organization to really start thinking about the culture changes and the organizational changes. I'd love to think from a leadership perspective in some of these other areas. So hiring is a really big topic in the community at the moment, both from the perspective of a leader wanting to hire people. So I think we'll start there. I'd love to kind of hear your advice or your experience for other platform leaders around how do you hire for a platform engineer? What are you looking for? What are you asking about in the interview? What's the distinguishing thing between, one engineer and another when you want to add them to your platform team?
Yeah, it's a very good, nuanced question. I'll try to give it a fair shake. Platform engineering as a domain is this, I would say, both beautiful and challenging domain where it's not one size fits all, meaning you're going to have a multidisciplinary team within your respective groups or cohorts that are comprising that particular department. What I mean by that, you're going to have a mix of people who write software. Maybe they call themselves software engineers. You're going to have people who are experts on running systems at scale. They know how to do performance testing or finding cost optimizations from a perspective of FinOps. Maybe they call themselves systems engineers. Maybe they call themselves site or system reliability engineers. Maybe they call themselves DevOps practitioners. There are many different roles and titles. The reality is you're going to need both of these kind of different groups to be able to work hand in hand on a particular product. You're going to need to make sure that the platform and the products that you build and put out there for other engineers to use, that they have the right type of reliability, availability. Hey, if I have automated tooling that provisions you with, let's call a new application, maybe it's a microservice, maybe it's an MCP server, whatever that is, you want to make sure that tooling is available 24 by 7 365. All of a sudden, right, it's a particular outage there, an incident may be treated internally as a P1 because effectively it might be blocking regular activities in terms of software development or during a particular incident. Those things that have actually happened to me, and which is what has required that we treat them as 24 by 7 by 365. You're going to need somebody with a software focus to leverage some of the automation frameworks that provided with an API first access. Obviously, a lot of this automation and tooling, you're effectively trying to build abstraction layers on top of primitives so we can actually start stitching them together in terms of being able to create and build blueprints and solutions. I'm not going to dig into the specifics of technical skills. I think that the community has a very strong understanding of what are the different technologies that comprise their stack. But one aspect that I do want to touch upon is you're looking for people who on both sides of on both tracks, who are willing and able to be on call because of hey, you're actually supporting a product 24 by 7 365, right? The other one is you need to have customer empathy or customer centricity. Why do you need to assess that in interviews? Well, chances are you as a platform team, some other team has tried to create a localized pattern that helps them move quicker. This happens a lot. Hey, maybe our front end team decided to build their own CI/CD pipeline. They've done a really good job supporting it, but now they have outgrown it and the business requires them to shift their focus. But how do you you as a platform team sort of keep that group productive or make sure that they have higher velocity and don't necessarily lose that focus? The immediate thought or the conversation that comes to mind or plays itself out in practices, well, why don't we transition that over to the platform team? Okay, so you as a developer, as a systems practitioner, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're inheriting someone else's code. and you need to be sympathetic to like, hey, this was probably built on a short timeline. Someone did it like, I don't know, as a part of a, let's go like, a hackathon. It's not perfect. It's not the best thing in the world. You need to like, maybe clean up some tech debt or like, not necessarily, we didn't necessarily pick the best practices like this, like you get it, all the different like, nuances. And you need to be able to kind of like, be super understanding to like, to what the original builders went through, what their kind of like, constraints were, what they had to solve for. Take that over and have to like, keep those like, considerations in mind and then try to make it better for the next iteration. In my experience, the subset of people who are able to do that on an emotional level dramatically shrinks, and you need to be able to kind of like, suss that out, in particular like, sessions, during like, interview loops where, hey, what does it mean for you to kind of like, have to help out someone else? What does it mean to either have to take over someone else's code that may be imperfect and you have to like, make it better? Those are kind of like, good questions that I would say platform teams have to like really put like, as a part of their, I would say, evaluation model for new hires. And obviously, if you're zooming out, we're talking about all these like, fun things and frameworks with product operating model and whatnot. It's not just about the leaders or like, the quote unquote the product managers or the manager types that should care about the customer centricity, understanding their users' pain points. The entirety of the team has to have that mindset and that culture, because if you're not able to sort of relate or understand, hey, this must be painful for you, oh gosh, like, this is causing you like, pain, and you have to like, split your focus across 5 different tools and you have to like open up 5 different tabs. Like I get it, like, it's painful. How about we make this better for you, much easier, so you don't have to do any of that? If your individual practitioners don't have that mindset or they're not looking to evolve into that mindset, that might be very difficult for you as a team to be successful.
And so to really kind of hammer that point home, if you've got two identical candidates, both of them are familiar with all the kind of tech in your stack. They're both good with Kubernetes. They can write, they're YAML experts. They have all the languages you need, containerization, IAC, everything. But one of them has that kind of what I call the platform empathy. They're able to think about that customer perspective, and one doesn't. You're always going to go for that customer focused side.
Yes, the second candidate, excuse me, would be preferable. Obviously, I wouldn't call it always. Like there's
Of course,
always obstacles that exist during like a
yeah.
given interview panel. But yes, the second candidate obviously would be preferable, because of like to what we said earlier in the conversation. Platform engineering is a cultural challenge first, technology second, and obviously the advent of AI. We cannot go a podcast without talking about AI, so I'm gonna bring it in. Bring it in. AI has gotten to the levels of maturity where the technical bits and pieces become, I would say, they're just as important as before. Don't get me wrong, but maybe you can sort of like get a little bit more out of it from like a candidate who is not as strong in those, but they have the right type of culture, they have the right type of mindset. And remember, everybody who is on the team is not just a culture sort of like creator, they're also a culture cultivator. So obviously the culture that you're trying to create as a leader is very important. For we are looking for people who are not just like following the culture that we're trying to establish, but they're also themselves creating or extending the culture by way of like how they behave, how they conduct. And those are things that you want to like look out for. What are some anti-patterns there? You definitely want to avoid situations where some of your, I would say, platform engineers are exhibiting signs or symptoms of us versus them mentality. That's a very big anti-pattern. Like, hey, you're not actually looking to help your community. You're sort of like, putting a barrier between you and your own users' needs. Those are challenges that I would say they're somewhat difficult to fix. They're not impossible, but if you're a leader, you definitely have to look out for folks who might be exhibiting those patterns, because obviously that doesn't necessarily, I don't know, puts the entirety of the team in a good situation. Finally, the thing that I will look for in an interview is, and this can always be like difficult to assess. I don't think I personally have a reliable mechanism for that just yet. I want to be transparent, but You want people on the team who are curious. Curiosity is a trait that, in my experience, you cannot coach for. You cannot, like, I would say, learn. It's not a hard skill. It, you just want to be surrounded by people who are curious, who are looking to, like, take the extra step, learn the next thing. Sort of like, maybe it's, I don't know, a 5% extra, but the motivation, the internal drive to kind of, like, be curious about a given topic is it it will take a given individual or a team a lot further as opposed to not having it.
Amazing. I think there's no better way to have closed us off than that. Thank you so much, Jordan, for talking to me today. I think there's like 10 articles we could create based on this conversation for sure. So if you haven't read any of Jordan's content that he's shared on the Platform Engineering blog, then take a look at that. And yeah, definitely, if you have questions, reach out to Jordan on LinkedIn. He's one of our ambassadors, and he's an awesome vehicle for platform engineering knowledge. So thank you so much, Jordan, for joining us today. And thanks everybody for watching. See you next time.